Hello everybody, here we are again talking about the Detroit Red Wings and what their expectations should be, whether or not they should be new expectations now that they have had a very busy offseason. Now before we start with that, please make sure to subscribe if you're new to me or the channel. That being said, let's get on into it. So Detroit is coming off of a very interesting campaign where they went 35, 37, and 10, and it was an 80-point total for them on the year for their points, and it was actually the first time since the 2015-16 campaign where they were able to match that or better. I will say the 2015-16 stretch was where they ended up with 93 points, but you kind of get my point, cracking the 80-point mark for the first time since then, which isn't a decade, but it's been a minute. And then, of course, during the offseason, they ended up having the biggest part of their offseason pitch where they ended up trading for Alex DeBrincat and then signing him to extension. Now that that's all done though, what should we expect for this team, as they are a group that has a fan base that's very passionate and expecting at least some form of hope going into this season. The good news is there is hope, but let's talk about some things holding them back. Now, these aren't necessarily things that are definitely going to hold them back, but I do think some things that will possibly hold them back. The first thing is the division. When you have a league that it's set up where there's so many teams and the divisions are bigger, it's hard to say that there's ever going to be a truly weak division. I do think for a while the Pacific was kind of that weak division, that odd man out, but a lot of these divisions are pretty good. I think the Atlantic has a case where it is a pretty good division. You have teams like Florida, you have Toronto, you have Tampa Bay, Boston, all those teams, and then some, as a lot of these clubs are really looking for the now or for the future of being good. And there aren't a ton of teams, really any that you could point out and say this team is for sure in a rebuild. I think Montreal is probably the most obvious, but even Buffalo is a team that has impressed really well. So that is something that we've talked about before in my most recent video about Detroit. The fact that this could be something that holds them back right now. Of course, they ended up getting a little stronger by trading for DeBrincat from the Ottawa Senators, but Ottawa was very busy in free agency. They ended up getting Jonas Korpisalo and hopefully solving some things in net there. And at this point, you got to wonder how Detroit will stack up within the division, because you have a decent amount of in-division games, and if they don't do well there, that's going to mean it's going to be harder to have a good step forward as a franchise. The second thing is going to be intra-division or intra-conference games. I think that's right. Basically, games within the conference you're playing against the Metro teams. I got to be honest, the Metro looks pretty good this year. The East looks really good this year. You have the Islanders, Rangers, Devils, Hurricanes, Penguins, Capitals, and honestly, even the Blue Jackets look a little bit better compared to where they were last season. So yeah, you have that situation all kind of going on there, and you would have to say that really out of all those teams in that division, Philly's the only one that I think could be pretty bad this year. Columbus may not be great. Washington, I think, kind of has a question mark up in the air as to what they'll be, but there's plenty of teams in that division that are going to be hard. For the Detroit Red Wings, they really got to take advantage of teams like Philly. You play them, 3 times a year. You got to win probably 2 of those and, try to get as many points as possible. As for the other teams, I think just where you'd go, getting 3 points out of 6 games would be ideal, especially against teams like Carolina, New Jersey, the Rangers, etc. Those are going to be some games you have to watch out for, and it doesn't get easy because, again, the East is loaded. Your division's hard, the other division's really stacked too, so that's going to be something interesting to see. Another thing possibly holding them back is goaltending, and this year I think it kind of remains up in the air as to what their goalie situation is going to be like. You have Ville Husso and then the Reimer James Reimer that is in net, and Reimer is not as old as I thought he was. He's been around basically like a year or 2 before I got back into sports when I was like 12 or 13, and he's just kind of been around for a while, so that's why he seems older. But in general, I don't think Nedeljkovic is there anymore, and this is kind of a weird situation where the Red Wings don't look exactly loaded in terms of the starting 2 goalies that they have now. Granted, of course, they have drafted, a couple of years ago, they drafted a goalie in the first round out of Edmonton for the WHL. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but that is kind of somebody that I think is in their pipeline. But in general, as of right now, I do think with the goaltending situation, you kind of wonder with the blue line and team defense in general how things will hold. I'm a big James Reimer fan because it is funny to see all the Reiminator names, but it is still one of those things where you don't exactly expect him to be big. Husso was a little bit older too, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't remember how he did in his first year in Detroit, but I don't think it was overly impressive. So if those 2 struggle, that's going to be something that holds the team back, despite the fact that they have so many fun players to watch. Another thing is, too, that I wanted to talk about, the last thing I should say, that I feel like could be holding them back, is the fact that they have a lot of prospects, like a lot. that they are very interested in for the future. The problem is a lot of these guys might not be NHL ready yet, or Steve Yzerman might decide, hey, we're going to wait a little bit to call them up. Some of these guys are playing in the AHL already for them, and then some other guys are in foreign leagues overseas. So I do think that's going to be one of those things where people say, oh, we've got these prospects. Yes, you do, but they might not be coming up just yet, and if they do, they might be short stints. That's why I'm not going to say that it is something that is boosting them up. It's something that's holding them back for right now. So with that being said, what do I think their new expectation should be? Well, I do think that they should expect to do better. They are a team that there's no reason they should finish last in this division. Again, it's tough to say who that team will be. I know Montreal has made some moves, but if I had to peg a team to be that team at the bottom of the division, I probably would pick the Habs as of right now. Maybe Buffalo takes a step back. Maybe Ottawa doesn't perform as well as people are hoping for them. I know Tampa Bay obviously just seems to be keeping like on a downward trend where they keep losing guys, and it's harder and harder to keep everything together. But I will say that if they finish last, that would just be frustrating, and there's no need to. They are not the 8th worst team or the the bottom place team in that division. That should be a goal, although I think it was already a goal for them. But in terms of newer goals, I would say probably hit the 90-point total mark. I know that doesn't seem that crazy. Great teams blow past that, especially early on, or at least, with plenty of time left in the season. But for Detroit, a team that really hasn't cracked that point in almost a decade, it would be good to see them go from 80 points to 90 points, a 10-point jump right there, whether that be 5 more wins, whether that be a few more wins and then a few regulation or overtime losses. I don't really care how it happens, just something to say that, we look at the standings and whether or not this actually happened is something that we should be able to say yes or no on. And then the final thing I would say for a new expectation for them is whether or not they're in the wild card hunt. I kind of basically said a lot of this, a little bit shorter in my previous video talking about the Red Wings and the Senators in their DeBrincat trade, but it remains true. Detroit is one of those teams that I'm not even saying that they have to be in the thick of it all year, but if they could just stay around a little bit longer and be a team that is one of the last few remaining teams, possibly to be there, and maybe get eliminated just, week before the season ends, whatever the case is, I still feel like that should be a good expectation for them. Are they going to go in the locker room and say, hey guys, I think that we should focus on, getting eliminated from the playoffs as late as possible? No, but I do think as an organization from within, that should be a new norm for them, or at least an idea about, hey, maybe we don't make it this year, but we should be a team that is sticking around with some of these other teams that are almost there. And if we do make it, great. If not, at least we should be right there on the cusp of it. So going forward, the year after, we should say the playoffs are now our goal. And where exactly do I see Detroit? Personally, I think, as wild as it sounds, I don't see them making the playoffs this year. I don't really feel like that's crazy. And I could almost see them finishing with a similar points total, because the East is literally loaded. You have so many teams within the division that's a grind, and then so many teams in the Metro that's a grind. You have to be able to take advantage of certain teams, and right now Montreal probably will be better, you'd imagine, especially the fact that Caulfield's back, or should be back, and that's going to be harder games to win. Again, Columbus is not going to be a team that should be ravaged by injuries, and they should be better than last year. And then you also have to add in the fact that outside of them, it's really just the Flyers, and even them, if they decide not to sell before the deadline, I don't know when their games come up against Detroit. Those are all, 50-ish games right there that would be games in your conference that are hard. Then you have your 32 games outside of that in the West. There's plenty of good teams in that conference too. So I think that for the Red Wings, I would say, ideally you finish above Montreal, you finish above Ottawa, you finish above Buffalo, and maybe if you're gutsy, finish above one of those teams that are the top 4 above you that were last season with Florida, Boston, Toronto, and Tampa Bay. Florida, question mark. Tampa Bay, continually losing pieces. I don't exactly know what's going to go on there. So maybe if you could leapfrog them and get 4th in your division, I do feel like that would be a really good thing. But in general, I would have to say for the Red Wings, I have no idea where they're going to finish. I don't think 8th, but I don't think top 3. So anywhere from 4 to 7. So I think they make the wild card. I don't, but again, kind of like I've said during this video, with the East being as good as it is, even if they have a year that is basically the same as this previous year, they could be better. They could just face better competition if that makes any sense. But again, it's all about new expectations and going out there and saying we should be doing this. So if they fail to meet those expectations, then you have to say why is it happening and what can we do to achieve those new goals as they take a step forward, and they should be able to get into a new phase where they're ready to go and hopefully be able to take care of the teams that are below them, compete and beat the teams that are there with them, and then try to go toe-to-toe with the teams above them. But anyway, what are your thoughts on the Red Wings this year? What do you think their new expectations should be? Do you think they should have the same expectations as next year? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. Also, please make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new. Everybody stay safe, have a great night, and you go love hockey all right. Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.